All right. Thank you everyone for joining me. My name is Christin Monroe. I just started working at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in December. Prior to that, I worked at a small college in southern Vermont that exclusively serves neurodivergent students. And so today I'm going to be presenting a human-centered framework that reduces accommodations requests. I During the time that I taught at the college in Vermont, I had all of the students would have theoretically needed accommodations. Um, I only had about 6 accommodation requests in that whole time, and all of the students said that everything that I was doing uh, made it so that they didn't need their accommodations. And so that was pretty cool. And I felt like I wanted to share that. And so that's kind of the background for this presentation. So going off of the human-centered framework, thinking about identifying which course policies have unintentional challenges with unintentionally overload executive function. The first part, that's what we'll be talking about, and then we'll be talking about how to redesign those course policies or individual components. And I hope that you leave with one ready to implement change that can reduce accommodations requests or the need for you to really like hone in on those accommodations requests. So I always start my talks off with a disclaimer because I've been to a lot of accessibility talks and I've been overwhelmed by many of them. And so I think it's important whenever you are exploring these things to think about how you can adopt what I've shared with you for your own context, um, specific to you, because if you don't own it, your students won't own it in whatever context you're teaching. Have taught chemistry in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're teaching chemistry. And to the students that you are teaching, I think it's very important to consider that when we are implementing best practice, it is not just the best practice from the literature or from folks that have the lived experience, but it's also the lived experience of your own students and your own observations. Um, so I already mentioned my time working at Landmark. Um, I currently work as an educational research associate, and I do identify as neurodivergent. I learned about my neurodivergence working at my previous college, and have a lot of ADHD tendencies, which really helped to inform and shape the how I taught chemistry. And in addition to that, the human-centered design idea is really focusing on co-designing and taking feedback from the students and iterating the process. When I started at that college, it was 2020. They just started offering a bachelor's degree in biology. Prior to that, they only had an associate's degree. And so I ended up developing 9 classes in less than probably about 3 years. I was there for a little bit over 5 years, but all the courses that I developed were in a very quick period of time. And so something else that I learned is that as you move forward in education, there are less resources to support neurodivergent students. It's a lot easier to find uh, multimodal experiences for students that for that 1,000 level general chemistry class. But as you go into organic chemistry and biochemistry, 200, 300 level, there are less and less resources. And I think that's probably true for a lot of things. And so I ended up having to develop a lot of things with the students as I was developing those courses. So um, to frame the challenge, I want you to have in the back of your minds this question. It's not something that, you have to answer right this moment, but think about when a student asks for an accommodation, what barrier are they actually encountering? During my time at my previous institution, I completed a course on post-secondary disability services, and I learned a lot about the accommodations process and where accommodations actually come from, which is really to combat that disability-related barrier. Um, I recently saw this article, which I just wanted to share about some statistics about how much disability support has doubled over the last 6 years. And, there are a lot of different speculations about why that might be. Um, but I think this article ties that in really well, talking about reducing the stigma around disability and mental health. I think a big thing is not just increased diagnosis, but K-12 support has gotten better. And so the more successful students with disabilities are in K-12, then they're more likely to go to college. And in addition to that, disability services have also done a better job of connecting with students. Um, so, you know, uh, these are just some things to think about because I think that these trends will likely continue. They estimate about 20% of the general population has disabilities, and we know that there are students that are attending higher education that do not disclose disability status. So, just something to consider. So just to define neurodiversity and neurodivergent, this is something that I still get tripped up on. So neurodiversity refers to everyone. I have a bell curve on the screen, and so neurodiversity is all of the students that and anyone that is in that bell curve. Neurodivergent refers to individuals that fall both below and above average when it comes to skills and abilities. I think it's always important to highlight the above average as well. And, sometimes what ends up happening is you have skills in one area that are above average and uh, below average in another area. I like to show this slide because it both aligns with the social model of disability, the idea that that if we change the world, then we minimize the idea of the disability. But I also want to consider how the world was really designed for the folks that live in this central box, right? And so I have worked to try to expand that box, or in some cases, shift the box, because you can't always accommodate everyone. But thinking about ways of expanding that box to allow more students to have access to the the content. And again, as I said, accommodation, this is from the American Psychological Association. Accommodation simply provide an alternative way to accomplish course requirements, eliminating or reducing disability-related barriers. But you aren't decreasing the rigor. You're just having the student access the content or demonstrate their content knowledge in a different way. And I think that that's something that's really important to emphasize. One of the things that I learned at my previous institution was executive function challenges. There are many different models of executive function, and about the only thing that they agree on is the basic definition of executive function, which is the cognitive processes that regulate an individual's ability to sustain self-directed action towards a goal. Um, Other than that, there are many different models, like I said, but the one that I like to present about is Brown's model of executive function, which was originally developed with a center around ADHD. But I think that one of the really nice things about this is it pinpoints specific areas in which students can get stuck along the process of completing a task. Activation. If I have any scientists in the room, I always say that, my students previously had a very high activation energy, which is kind of a chemistry joke. And the environment that we created was kind of the enzyme that would lower that activation energy. If you're a chemist, you would get that. If you're not, you probably won't, or biologist maybe. But I always like to say that because I think it's funny. But other areas, but going along this track, you can think about if a student has challenges with focus, barriers with focus, or emotional regulation. But when a student doesn't turn in work, it doesn't mean that they're not putting the effort in. And I think that that's something that I learned. And I think that's something that is useful to remind ourselves. I recently completed a blog that'll be published sometime this summer about how students aren't always underthinking, sometimes they're overthinking, and that can actually create a lot of issues with them submitting work. And so sometimes when they're not submitting work, it's not just because they're not putting the effort in. Sometimes they just don't know how to direct that effort. And I like to use this as an example of a non-academic executive function challenge. So these are pictures that my dad provided. So I say this because I know him really well, and I was able to kind of unpack where his executive function challenge comes out for making jewelry. So he's been polishing stones since since he was in high school. So you can kind of estimate how long that's been. So he has a basement full of rocks that he loves to collect, going to different conferences and collecting stones. He is so confident in the process of polishing stones because, again, he's been doing it for so long. But where he gets stuck is the metalwork and the actual completion process, which is, farther along in that completion process. And so he doesn't have as much jewelry as he probably should because he doesn't want to screw it up because he's not as confident with the metalwork. And so then he'd rather not complete the jewelry than have partially completed jewelry that isn't perfect. And that's kind of an example of managing frustration. I've seen a lot of students that kind of have that perfectionist mindset of if it's not perfect, I won't turn it in. And in some cases, they'd rather get a 0 with no judgment than actually get a grade. And in my dad's case, if he was being graded on jewelry, he probably wouldn't have a grade as well or as high as he probably should because he would hesitate to turn in the work unless it was perfect. Um, okay. So, today, I have identified some of those hidden barriers, just for some, to kind of plant that seed. Now we're going to be moving on to redesigning one course element, and again, hopefully reducing that accommodation dependence. I should highlight here that accommodations are a necessary thing. I'm not advocating for accommodations being eliminated. It's an important legal process that exists for a very important reason. But if we can design our courses to minimize at least a little bit the need for extreme changes, then that's a win in my book. And I really do advocate for those small changes. Okay, so first, I'm just going to have a moment of independent reflection. I want you to think about one element of your course to focus on for redesign. This is something that I think, I want everyone that is here to do something that works best for them. So I will give everyone a couple minutes to ponder this. If you have questions, this is also a good time to put questions in the chat. So this is just a good reflective moment. In the chat, there is a link to the worksheet. It's also on the QR code. You can download it from Google Docs and then edit it for your own notes. Not required, but just a resource that you can, if you want to kind of take notes for yourself. So I'll give everybody a couple minutes to consider this question. All right, so that was about 2 minutes. I just do want to, again, invite any questions about the content that I have already presented, about executive functions or anything like that. But I also do want to ask folks if they're willing to share what course element do you want to focus on today? So feel free to put questions in the chat and or share what element you want to focus on. All right, it looks like we got a quiet. Oh, there we go. All right, so we have participation structure and create a specific assignment, create a technology supported learning activity. Awesome. Thank you both for sharing those. Um, all right, so I think we'll move on to the next part. Um, Also, as a side note, just for accessibility, I have the QR code to the worksheet on all of the pages that it's necessary. So the worksheet does not change, just to prevent some confusion for that. So the next, we have a fairly small group, so we could do this either as a larger group or in a breakout room. But for the next part, um, I want to consider three questions, which are what are students required to do cognitively, not just academically, when they're trying to complete the assignment? There are different processes that students have to go through to actually get the assignment done. I know that this is a largely online based group, and so these are things like logging into your learning management system and actually finding the content. Um, papers has become a reasonable accommodation. And it was so much easier when you could just hand the student an assignment and say, do this. But now they have to go through those added potential barriers of accessing or finding the content. Um, Another question to consider is where executive function demands might be higher and visible, and which part of the structure might prompt accommodations requests. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I'm going to copy these questions and put them in the chat. Um, so maybe we do two breakout rooms. Is that something that we are able to do today? Um, I was just asking Julie that.
I am so sorry. I thought you were talking to the group and getting a
Sorry.
consensus.
Oh no,
Apologize.
I was asking you. I'm so sorry. I didn't
Okay.
clarify that. Are we able to
Um,
do breakout rooms in here?
um, yep.
Okay.
Let's see here. Assign automatically or manually? Just do automatically.
I think automatically should be fine. All right,
Okay.
so I will give you 5 minutes in the breakout room to consider these. Actually, you know what? I'm going to give a little bit more time. I think we're a little bit ahead. So let's do 8 minutes in the breakout room to discuss these questions.
And you wanted two breakout rooms, correct?
Yes.
All righty. Here we go.
All right. Thank you. All right, welcome back. So I joined one of the breakout rooms. I'm just going through and getting my slides back up. Um, so I'm curious if breakout room two, if anybody from breakout room two wants to share what you guys talked about. And I'll jump back to breakout room one, but I was in there, so I'm gonna put breakout room two on the spot first.
Oh, I think that was our group. Is that right?
I think so,
Yes, it was
Ryan.
the other one.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I accidentally kind of sidetracked us, but we were initially talking about course navigation and an attempt to try to not standardize, but make more consistent without using the word standardize, and how this is from an instructional design standpoint, and how there was some immediate pushback from faculty. But the idea was great idea for a solution is developing a course template that has that consistency for things like navigation, and then just promoting faculty to buy into that template. So then students that do have like neurodivergent needs could have that, or executive function needs could have a little bit of consistency there.
And that's a great point. So I will tell you, having been a faculty member with, and they did have templates at my previous institution. You give a faculty member a template within 10 minutes, they have completely changed it. And unintentionally, it's not like they're evil and they're trying to manipulate it or whatever, but there's a lot of you know different ways that you can interpret how it should be laid out. And so it's such a great idea, but in practice it does become very challenging. With that said, though, finding I think that from an individual instructor perspective, um, having consistency in how you lay out your learning management system is really important. And if you don't necessarily stick to the template that you've been given, but you keep it consistent throughout the semester, that can go leaps and bounds for the students. And I will also tell you that it takes a lot. Even, they say you kind of finalize a class after you've taught it for 3 years. I mean, that's kind of a myth, but even after 3 years, it still took me 2 or 3 hours. I would copy the Canvas page from the previous semester. It would still take me 2 to 3 hours to update everything and kind of make sure that it was formatted in the way that students could access it. Another way, I'm a big fan of the low tech, high tech kind of merger. One thing that I would do is I'd actually print out, like I'd have a page, a single page that was kind of like an outline page each week, and I would print that out and hand it to students at the beginning of the semester. And if it seemed like a lot of students needed the paper, then I would print it out again. But I had every link that the students would need to get for that week on that single page. And I think that the students really found that helpful because it's like if you can just get to this one page, I'm going to send an announcement. So but once the students get used to that routine, hopefully it helps. Although, you know, being a college student is like having at least five different bosses who have all different expectations, and it's cognitively a lot. But thank you for sharing that, Ryan. Does anybody from the group that I joined want to share what we talked about?
All right, I can share a little bit. I was talking about an assignment that I'm working on for a workshop where there's a pre-work component. And so they're expected to review a bunch of learning tools and look at the website, review a worksheet that I put together, or not a worksheet, like a guide with some details about them. And then this is the precursor for an assignment. And one of the challenges there would be, and thank you, Kristen, for your ideas here, but one of the things is making sure that the activity doesn't require that they complete that pre-work for any number of reasons they may not be able to. And so then that puts them at an immediate disadvantage when they're coming into the classroom or the workshop or whatever. So making sure that you provide at least like the key points for them so that there's an entry point even for those who maybe weren't able to get to it. And then I don't know if you want to share what you were talking about when that's some great information about like getting accommodations and that the curve there of like getting used to the process for getting the accommodations.
Well, thank you, Leah, for sharing that. I could just share briefly what Wanda had described, that even the process of obtaining accommodations, especially testing accommodations, can have those hidden executive function barriers because students have to request them in advance and know what they need to request, and navigating that process can be challenging as students are especially making that transition for the first time. The good news is that according to Wanda, they do end up getting that process down after the first time, but there are definitely challenges to seeking out accommodations to begin with. All right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing and doing that breakout. We'll move on to the next part, which is the human-centered design in STEM teaching. So this is a quote that is widely used, but the attribution is unknown. The world does not become inclusive by accident; it becomes inclusive by design. And I think that that really kind of shapes the ideas that I'm talking about today. And again, on the flip side of that, there are environments where you can minimize or eliminate disability-related barriers. One of the jokes that one of my colleagues would say at my previous institution was a blind person is not disabled in a cave. If you are in a cave, in fact, a blind person is actually your best friend in a cave because they're going to be able to navigate much better than you are in the dark. And so, in the right environment, they don't need accommodations. Um, and there's actually a town in Germany, I believe, that is fully accessible for blind people. So it is possible to design places to minimize that need for the personalized accommodations. Um, so I do, in terms of human-centered design, thinking about that environment design. How can you design your environment in a way that just, again, minimizes those barriers for students to access the content and demonstrate their content knowledge? I think that the biggest thing for me is, are my students do their grades reflect their content knowledge? And if the answer is no to that, then what can I change? And so, inequality often hides in policies, instructions, and structures. And using a human-centered lens can help um, to mitigate those things. And so from that perspective, the first part is listening to students. I can't emphasize that enough. I learned just as much taking classes at my previous institution about teaching neurodivergent students as I did just engaging with them and having them comfortable enough to share. And that's not always, I kind of worked in a bubble where that was possible. But if there are places that some of the projects that I'm working on at Illinois include recording students sharing about their experiences as disabled individuals on campus. So ways of just hearing from the students directly, and then collaborating with them to think about ways that you can identify those barriers and then implementing small changes. One of my past deans had said, you don't need to move the entire parking lot to make your class more accessible. Think about moving a parking spot. And so those are those small changes. And, teaching is about progress, not perfection. Start small and iterate. Okay, so uh, I'm just going to do a quick waterfall poll. This is where you pick one of these, A, B, or C, put it in the chat, and then we all hit enter at once. And I'm just curious which human set. So don't put your selection in the chat, but don't hit enter until I say. Which human-centered phase do you spend the least amount of time when it comes to course design? I'm just curious. It's not a graded thing. I'm just curious. So put A, B, or C in the chat and then hit enter. All right. So it looks like a lot of A's. That's interesting. Does anybody that put A in the chat want to share why you think that might be?
I guess for me, in my mind, I think the inspiration is somebody says we need X, and so like there's the impetus, and then ideation is thinking of all the different ways that you can put that together. But like usually the inspiration for me comes from a directive.
Yeah, that does make sense. I think that's sort of how our whole culture is is uh is designed, right? We don't fix the intersection until there's a horrible car accident there, unfortunately. Um, and and it's hard, you don't always know the students that are going to be in your classroom, and so it can be really challenging to think about that. Um, Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so um, I wanted to just discuss briefly some executive function demands. I think we've already kind of touched upon these things. What are some of the things that the students are managing potentially invisibly, interpreting unclear expectations? Something just to note about that is I never spent a lot of time making my instructions clear and I did wait for the students to tell me what was unclear. My solution to that was I would give them the chance to revise things. They always had the opportunity, except for the summative things like exams, but they would always have the opportunity to revise things because I never knew what the students were going to do with some of my work. And so, I think that it's really important as faculty to not think too hard about all of the pitfalls going in. It takes those iterations with the students to really land on things that are clear, and giving the students the grace to kind of say, okay, you know what, this is the first time I'm doing this, so if there's anything unclear, you can submit something and you can revise it. Again, I emphasize this of deciding when complete is complete enough. Sometimes the students don't know when it's done. And then the the endless possibilities of how to interpret things. So finding ways of managing that. One thing that I did, not only giving students the opportunity to revise, I also told my students, I'm like, if you're working on something in my class, you cannot leave until you turn in your draft. And I'll make a copy of it, whatever you need, but I don't want to give you a 0 for something you've already put time and effort into. And that's something that, it takes a lot of trust for them to actually turn those things in. So adding those checkpoints and thinking about placing those opportunities for engagement can be really helpful. Okay, so for our last breakout room, I know we've only got about 8 minutes left, so I'm gonna put us back in the same breakout rooms. And I want you to consider, let me just grab this for the chat. One executive function barrier you uncovered, or one assumption built into the design that you hadn't noticed before. So we'll do the same breakout so that because we already know each other. And we will go in for let's just do 4 minutes.
So we have lost a few people in room one. There's only two folks in there. Is that still okay?
Actually, why don't we have a smaller group now, so why don't we just stay as a larger group and we can just chat.
Okay.
So thank you, Julie. So is there has anyone thought about, and you put it in the chat as well, an executive function related barrier that you've uncovered or an assumption that you hadn't noticed before?
I guess another one that occurred to me for my activity would be just like the concept of rapid prototyping because it's, like a 30-minute activity. So we're just going for proof of concept. But that requires you to prioritize and like organize your thoughts really quickly.
They're the, the best place to do that is with the little ones that don't already have that intrinsic idea of, oh, I've been told I'm wrong all the time, so I'm just going to stop being inventive, right? That's a lot of students. Anxiety is a real thing, and especially when they have when they're neurodivergent, and they tend to diverge from what is quote unquote normal, right? Or typical. And so they end up kind of overthinking it and just kind of saying like, oh, no one's going to think my ideas are valuable. I think one way to combat that on top of just giving the students more time, is also to acknowledge the value of their contributions being coming from different backgrounds, and just to emphasize that. you know, I've always said that my students are much more creative than I am. And at some point, people kind of questioned that. They said, "You're a pretty creative person." And then I realized that all of the students that I've worked with in my professional career have either come from low income, first gen, and or neurodivergent backgrounds. And then I said, "Oh, wait, that's because they're all very diverse and creative." So emphasizing that to your class can also really help with that, in my opinion. Um,
Thank you.
so yeah. Motivation to start, yes. Activation is a very real thing. And so it finding the right time and place to get started on things can be a big challenge for students. And again, doing things during class to help that, even getting them started with something at the end of class, can be useful so that they at least have a starting point before they leave your space. And then not everyone is tech savvy, or in some of the nuanced ways ed tech can be, and there's a learning curve. That is so true. We can't just assume that students know things. I always use the example of Excel. Everybody assumes that students learned Excel at some point in time in their education. And then when they come into a class and they don't know it, they're at a huge disadvantage. So taking the time to have that space to learn is, so important, and not making the assumption that they know how to use those tools. It can really make the difference between their success and not. So, yeah. All right. And then uh, another one from the chat is I hadn't realized until more recently about time blindness. That is I mean, I experienced it a lot at my past institution, and it is a real thing for some students. And so giving them the opportunity to giving them more of those benchmarks is really valuable because sometimes they can get stuck. One of the analogies one of my students said is they would go down a rabbit hole and then they dig so far that they found a cave and then they start wandering the cave and then they forgot why they were digging the rabbit hole to begin with. So giving those reminders and time blindness things is, it is very, very useful. And then there's also something in the chat about interest-based motivation. And I know we have a couple minutes left, but in terms of interest-based motivation, AI can be a really useful tool if you know that a student has an interest in something. The example that I've seen in the past is like if a student is really interested in something like Pokemon, if you can go to AI and say, could you frame this in that type of with that in mind, it can give you some really creative ways of presenting information. So AI is a great tool for, in my opinion, kind of closing that gap sometimes between different neurotypes. And you have to put the information in, you have to learn about the student to be able to do that. So there is that human moment. All right, so thank you, everyone. Julie just said we have a couple minutes, so I'm happy to hang out and answer any questions. I hope this was helpful. Again, take whatever you find most valuable. I will also just share a slide with my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer questions now, or if you have questions, you can obviously reach out to me later, but happy to answer questions.